Welcome to this ordinary meeting of Hunters Hill Council number 4467. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and the waters that surround us, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present.
We thank you, Lord, for the honour of being called by our fellow citizens to this office of honour and trust. Give us grace diligently and honourably, free from private interest or prejudice, to discharge the duties entrusted to us to the common good and as in your sight, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Please have a seat. I see we're all here this evening, so there are no apologies. Are there any declarations of interest, councillors? So I'll move to the confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting. Moved Councillor Collins, seconded Councillor Williams. Is there any discussion required? Councillor Collins.
Thank you. I might just briefly speak about my questions without notice. First one, just on page 10, when the document was created, I've since been informed that it was created on the Monday, the 22nd. It seems as though we may have come to the end of the line here where we're not going to find out why it is that the Speaker's order was how it was. We've still got evidence here that Richard Quinn submitted his form last, or after all the others, and was somehow put first, and we're lost to understand how that actually happened. So,
Councillor, I don't think this is not an opportunity for a debate.
No, I'm just
you've received the
elaborating on my.
We can bring this to another meeting at another time, but this is not an opportunity for debate.
Actually, well, I might bring it in the further. I'll bring it up at 4.1 then. That's fine.
Thanks, Councillor.
Thank you.
Any further discussion required on the minutes, councillors? I put the motion they be accepted. That's carried. Are there any other matters arising from minutes? All right, so I think we move to our speaker. We have a speaker tonight, Ms. Kate Cuddy. Welcome, Kate. Miss Cuddy, excuse me. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a lovely opportunity for me to come back and visit because I now volunteer with the hens. After I worked with them while I was on council, I got to sort of know some of the work they were doing. And frankly, I was so impressed that when I started in my new job, I thought, well, actually, I am very lucky to have Fridays off. I know what I'd like to do with my volunteering time. So that's where I've ended up. And I work in business development and community development, and I guess I was struck by what the hens do, the networks and how efficiently they use the resources they've got. And so I think that's pretty exciting, and I want you guys to know how exciting that is, really. And so I've got a little movie clip for you. The other thing is that the girls have now been at Henley Greens. Well, it's not just the girls, there's an incredibly wide pack of human beings there. And their construction is complete. The crops are extremely productive, and there's all sorts of lovely things going on. So I've got a little movie to show you first, just as a bit of fun to add to your meeting. We've turned the music down because we're broadcasting and we don't want to get into trouble with any copyright laws. So yes, it's more fun with the music, but you get the general idea. That's what the green looked like when the girls and all of their volunteers got involved. So the photos are from the work bees and a whole lot of events that have happened spontaneously as the garden's being built. Old cubby house has been rescued to become a hen house. And essentially what you're seeing is a range of the people who are engaging with the projects that the hens are doing as part of developing the garden. And And I am grateful for all of you who've been down to visit, and would highly recommend that the rest of you come down. We'd love to invite you. We make great food. And I think the other thing that's really exciting, because of its position, it's of course right next to the preschool. And the preschool has become a symbiotic part of the way that Henley Green operates. Thank you for that. That's just a little bit of eye candy. Much more fun with the music, but we'll make sure that we can show that to you at another opportunity. So really, I just wanted to share a little bit of what the hens are doing around Henley, and also their projects generally, because I suspect you probably just haven't got the information, and I think communication's so strong, and I'm really aware of the challenges that all of you face too as you juggle resources and finding sustainable solutions across the community, which is, as you will remember, exactly what I'm about. So I'd like to share this with you, and I'm just going to take you through my progress report. Next slide, thanks Wendy. So just a little snapshot, because the hens have been around now for 3 years. They've just celebrated their 3rd birthday, and what I was amazed to discover is that they've actually won 50 grand in grants and fundraising, driven entirely from their little grassroots network. That's all being reinvested back into the community. So the grants, as you know, are often project specific. They're about redeveloping volunteers or getting equipment. They're never about lease money, rent, unfortunately, but they've been a great opportunity to deliver very specific projects against the needs that the hens see in the community. They've now got more than 40 volunteers. There's 25 different enterprise partners, so there's endless collaborations going on, which has been really fabulous. That's been the opportunity you saw last year to deliver Bedlam at the Bay. Was much to my amazement, really, at the time, when I thought, oh, this must be just a small group of people that are proposing to do this. And it was something very, very special, and we're really excited that we'll be able to do that again next year. More than 30 community partners. I mean, it's probably more like 50 plus with the amount of groups that have come on board. I think the thing I notice as a difference in working with community is, because it's such a big intergenerational group, they have reached into the most incredibly diverse networks and resources, and you can really see that coming through in the way that Henley Green has developed so quickly, and the hens' ability to deliver on some of those projects. As you know, they got 2 council awards, which is fabulous, and they've also got 5 projects underway, which I'd love to tell you a little bit about. Next slide, please, Wendy. So, where the construction completed, we have veggie pods. So you may have noticed in the movie, I'm not sure if you all know what a veggie pod is. Essentially, Trent Zimmerman gave a grant to the hens to put in 10 veggie pods, which means that they've been able to produce seedlings at a really fast rate to create a productive garden, but they've also been able to engage with a diverse range of community members who have limited mobility because they're up at waist height. So people can go in and work and get involved in the gardening. Anybody can, and it's a fabulously accessible site. So that makes a huge difference, that we can just say anybody's welcome and anybody can just show up, and I really celebrate that about that particular venue. Boomerang bags have just started at Henley Green. So do you all know boomerang bags? You know of. Joe Taranto's helping to drive that forward, so essentially a whole group of people get together to share skills they may sew or they may be learning, and to make the bags that are put in shopping centres around the area, and they boomerang if you haven't bought yours. So really great sustainability initiative, and they had their first meeting in the boardroom on the Green yesterday, and started cutting bags, and it was fabulous to see them there with it, along with our usual volunteers. The Chamber of Commerce at Gladesville has connected the hens with UTS, and they're now working in partnership with their shopfront project. Again, I'm not sure if you're familiar. The Centre for Social Impact at UTS wants to make sure that they're connected across every structure of society. So what they're doing is their students, both their MBA program and their graduates, are able to work on projects that interest them for not-for-profits for free. So what's happening? Their MBA program's working on a strategic plan for the Happy Hens right now. It's been an amazing process with a lot of the volunteers from the hens learning a lot along the way as well. And there's also a branding team from the design department that have reinvented the Happy Hens brand and have created a fabulous identity. They're working on a new website for them at the moment. So all of this has been amazing, free resource. And it's connected us to a really fabulous section of the community that might not have accessed Henley otherwise. So we've also been hosting a range of students from all over the city and at the boardroom on the Green. And we'll look forward to sharing a bit more with that as the projects are completed. We're running Are You OK at the Greens. Are You OK Day is on Thursday nationally. We're running our usual gardening session on Friday, but we're putting on a special morning tea. We'd love to invite you all and the staff and anybody that would like to come along and have a really good chat and piece of cake. We're excellent at doing that. And what we decided when we postponed Bedlam at the Bay, with a great awareness about the issues in mental health and resources at the moment, is that we would continue to work at a grassroots level. So we're doing various events with them and Reach Out and Lifeline, who we partnered with last year. What else can I tell you about Humans Grow at the Green? So we're very pleased also to win a grant through the clubs very recently. This is fairly new news. We put in for $10,000 to make the property and equipment more accessible, and they've come through and said, yep, you've got it, we've got $5,000 this year, and they'd like us to reapply next year for the other half. So we're pretty excited. I know what it takes to come up with money like that as a community group to reinvest in the community, and I'm really excited that that means that such a fabulous place can be enjoyed by everybody. And we'll be in touch about that as well, but we'd really love to bring everybody along on the journey with that. And obviously I worked in a role where I was very much about inclusion, and it's really fabulous to see, for me, those people that I was working with and lots of different networks coming together and choosing to be at Henley. It's really exciting. And yes, I've mentioned the Green Boardroom and Green Classroom. So these were just ideas initially, but what we're noticing is the more and more groups that experience what the hens are doing and the positive way that they approach things that says, let's see what we can do, the more people are coming forward and saying, actually, would it be okay if we came down and brought our group and to visit? And we always say yes. And so we're really conscious of working out what that looks like as we go along, and I feel really strongly that it's really important that we can talk to councils. Obviously that was my job before, but I just see the benefits of that lovely communication, and it makes it easy. And I know for all of you, probably as you're dealing with your transformation and resources, that there may be opportunities to bring them forward. So I've suggested to the guys that I'd be very happy to be a point of liaison. If that's something that you would like to come along on, then by all means let us know. Next slide, please. I'm almost there. Thank you so much for being patient with my excitement. Wendy?
Oh, sorry, there's the next one.
Oh, sorry, go down. Oh, no, we are. Thanks. So I don't want to be repetitive. I would just add that the Happy Hens are about a lot more, as you've heard, than just Henley. Bedlam at the Bay continues, and we have small groups of volunteers that go along there regularly, and actually some groups that just want a little more quiet and isolation by the bay are choosing that that's where they'd rather have. And what we're seeing is some of the core volunteers are rising up and saying they'd like to take on a little bit more responsibility, which is really lovely to see that volunteering being stimulated and people stepping up. We will hope to continue at Henley Green, so there's another year at least to go, and I know that the hens would really love to have an ongoing conversation about what that might mean in the future, and I'm aware there's a lot of complexities about that, but yeah, I think the opportunity to partner and to keep moving forwards, and what I see is the hens are really activating what was a dreadfully wasted space before, and it's so lovely. The Bridge Club come and buy their vegetables on the way out each day, and they leave a gold coin in the bucket. And it's lovely to think that the honesty system can work that way. It may not last forever, but it's really nice to see that connection going, and the Shanty group that meet on Sundays are doing the same. Humans Grow at the Green, I've told you a little bit about that, so you'll see a press from us as we start to make the decisions on spending the money that we've got with the grant and getting that resourcing. And we'd love to reach out to council for communication and to reach out to some of the groups that you're trying to support and citizens that might need that connection from social isolation through the program. Sad Boats Grow Happy. So this one was something that I was really excited about, I must confess. I've known for a long time that all of those unloved rowboats sit underneath Henley Community Centre, and I always used to ask, but what happens to them? So we have an idea. And that, because we're all about upcycling, and we now have an architect and an engineer and several carpenters and lots of artists, and even the design and tech teacher from Drew from Joey's involved as volunteers, it seemed like such a lovely opportunity to do up some of the boats as installations and get scouts and community involved. Right, I'm wrapping up, Mark, thank you for the hint. Just the other thing I'd say is that we've been approached to have some IBM corporate volunteers come along to experience what it's like to be part of it, and we've got Duke of Ed students doing their community service work with us, so we're really happy, and thank you. I think I've exhausted my slides as well as my time. Okay, so you got the message from me. I'm really just talking about people and social capital, and we're incredibly grateful for the help and support that the Hens have been given, but I would really encourage a conversation about how it can move forward from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any
questions, councillors? Councillor Miles.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Hens do a fantastic job, and obviously things like Bedlam at the Bay, it's a little bit disappointing that this year perhaps you didn't get the support that you ought to have gotten. I guess my question is, what can council do, and obviously you being there now is going to improve communications, but what can council do to perhaps better support the Hens down there in what they're doing? And obviously it's growing quite organically, and you've got another year's lease, and I don't think that we would be looking to boot anyone out because they're doing such a fantastic job down there. So what can we do to maybe provide more support? Because I'm quite conscious that that's something that we need to, ramp up and continue.
Yeah. Thank you for asking, and I came with a very short list to answer that question. Thank you. The first thing is we probably need to work out, and this is something I'm working through with the staff at the moment, a key to the accessible toilet. Unfortunately, the accessible toilet is inside the building. There is an old toilet on the outside of the building which we can use for some of our volunteers, but people are coming down in large wheelchairs and with restricted mobility on walking frames. It is just not possible to manage the kind of door and the kind of teeny turning circle that's in the space. So obviously I know about this stuff, and I'm working hard to educate staff as we go along, but that's going to be really important, and I understand that that's seen as a bit of a security risk at the moment, talking to staff, because there's not a locked door going through to the bar area. So that's something that I believe is being worked through at the moment, but I think I would, on my own basis, say that I think that the Hens probably deserve that goodwill, because the thing is, we don't want to have to check with somebody if they've got a disability before they come to visit. One of the staff asked last week, what do we do with the disabled people? Which, needless to say, I was horrified, because the whole point of being as inclusive is everybody is welcome. So if there is a way to just simply get the swipe card and the key so that people can feel free to be independent and welcome, that feels like an easy fix, and I'm sure it's just a communication thing that's working through at the moment. The other thing is that November we're having our end of year thank you and harvest celebration, and we're very grateful that the council in this situation have agreed for us to use the east end of the green and keep the meeting room as wet weather backup. So that's going to be a really important possibility in the future, and I understand that you're going through a process of reorganising how the community grants are sorted, and I was really grateful that November was done before that process is, but I think that's going to be a conversation for the future, because I know that that room is empty pretty much all the time, except for when the shanty group rent it, and occasionally it gets hired, which is great, but my proposition would certainly be, I think that the Hens could help activate the space, and if it's not being used, perhaps there's an opportunity to have it as a backup just for wet weather, so that when these groups are coming down, there's always that option. And I really want to support that relationship of trust and belief going through. So I'd really love to hear from staff and council if you feel like there's any obstructions or issues with being able to do that. But I think that in itself, it's such a fabulously accessible site. We're going to develop it further with the grant money that we've got, but the toilets are no-brainer, really. So I guess this is just the first step. I'd like to be a liaison person that can help you and really encourage sending anybody to us. I would like to reflect on what the council's doing and make you a part of it as well. And I know that good news is a really nice change when you're dealing with all the things you have to deal with in local government, and we can be a part of it. So please get involved.
Only 2 things you want?
I might just keep
Send us a
it
list.
brief for bullet points, but let's just say the conversation's opened, and I would really welcome if any of you have ideas or questions about what's going on or particular interest in some of the projects that you come back.
Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Sanderson.
Yes, thank you. Good to see you again, Kate. I attended a morning tea there a while back, and one of the things that really struck me about the inclusiveness in that whole society is we had a group of seniors down there, and the children from the preschool came down and gave a concert. Do you have any concerts like that planned in the near future?
We do indeed. They happen spontaneously often as well. So the children are raising their hens with us, and they come down every day in groups throughout the day. And the hens so love them that the hens run up to the gate, the fence, and cry at them like puppies now because they love the children. So they're always there on the weekdays, and their families get involved in our work bees as well. And one of the things I missed when I was going through, we're also applying for the Stronger Communities grant federally at the moment. And the proposition, I don't know if any of you have seen the ABC series Old Age Home for 4-year-olds. So we have a partnership with Strider and with the preschool, and we're putting in a grant to get some kiddie seats for one of the Strider vehicles. And we have the opportunity both with the age groups we work with for them to come and visit at the Green, and the kids are already there and it's already accessible. And we also have the opportunity, the director of the preschool has signed up with the parents to say we'd really love to take some of the kids to visit in some of the aged care homes as well. So really exciting stuff. We're going to get that money. But grant writing is something that the group are really good at, and I see the difference in their kind of business acumen and the way they're able to make that a sustainable solution. Thanks, George.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Great presentation. We'll look forward to hearing from you again.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Kate. Councillors, we move on to item 4.1, I believe, is Councillor Sanderson.
Could I move the motion just with one small addition to it, if I could?
Yes.
I'd like to add that we...
Sorry, do we have a second, or was it? Second, Councillor Williams. Thank you.
Well, I probably should read it first, but just that we authorise the General Manager to make corrections before it goes out to exhibition.
Were they the corrections you mentioned today?
Well, I've made 3 submissions on this, Mr Mayor, so well, there's a whole range of them, so, you know, any that I think that the General Manager feels are appropriate.
Where would you like to see that under? Item 3. Item 3.
Yes.
Okay, we'll cover it, Councillor Sanderson.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Would you like to speak further to that?
Yes, Mr Mayor. This is an incredibly important document. I mean, one of the earlier submissions I made when this came up was to reference the earlier motions that I'd initiated and have become resolutions of council in order to give councils the opportunity to amend LEPs to deal with issues like, you know, complying development, which is, you know, causing significant problems in our you know, areas around Gladesville and Boronia Park. I think we've got to be incredibly cautious with this because this document, as a very minimum, I think will be there so that if there's any misinterpretation of our or any ambiguity in our LEP or DCP, this will be the point that people will go to. This will be the evidence, just as speeches in Parliament are evidence for how law is intended. This will be the evidence as to how our DCP and LEP will be interpreted in the future. We must get this document right. I think we've got to really encourage the community to be involved in it. One of the difficulties with it, I had trouble reading it myself. It'd be nice if it was a little bit more enticing to read. But I think we've really got to engage with people like Hunters Hill Trust and anyone who can assist us with this document so that we really spell out in greater detail all that we need for this to be a stepping stone. One of the advantages we have as a council, we are not, as a smaller council, we're not going to have a lot that's required of us in terms of the North District Plan. This gives us the opportunity, because I've always seen this document as a really important step in terms of allowing our community to have a greater say into our planning instruments. And we're not going to be so burdened as some other areas are, because we will not be required to provide quite so much in terms of satisfying the requirements of the Northern District Times. So I think it's really important that we take the maximum advantage when we continue to develop this document.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So, is anybody wishing to speak against? Councillor
Not
Collins.
against, but I've got a question, and I emailed it through last week about not a question, about this whole municipality thing. There seems to be inconsistency across not just this document but everywhere. And I mean, the vision statement says, is this a municipality or is it not? Or do you not know? So I think we need to clarify.
I think you sent through a question. Is that still being considered?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'll have to take it on notice.
Right.
I've had
Yeah. The General Manager may not have seen your question or addressed herself to at this stage.
Okay.
Just timing issue.
Well, maybe actually probably the answer to it.
Councillor Williams, thank you.
Thank you. When the new Local Government Act came in 1993, councils were changed over to be local government areas. The Hunters Hill Council and its community believe that the municipality, and some other councils retain shire and city and all this sort of stuff, that municipality was an important identifier for Hunters Hill, and as such we secured the name, and the intent was to use that as a descriptor of Hunters Hill. Legally it's a local government area, but also legally we have that name. And there is an expectation, or was in those days and into perpetuity, that term municipality would continue to be associated with Hunters Hill. So that's the origin of it. The intent was clear, and I think there's no problem and no reason why we can't continue to call ourselves a municipality, as we are.
Thank you, Councillor. I believe there was a question. I think just haven't had time to deal with it. So we can also look at that, and if there are any conflicts, we can make some adjustments. Councillor Collins.
I might just briefly, just briefly speak on that one issue. We don't actually have that business name, and even if we did, that would be referring to this organisation rather than the area. So I think perhaps if it could come back as an item at a future meeting, just to clarify, because if a municipality doesn't exist, we need to
Be sure.
just start using the proper language, I think. So,
Right.
because this is a legal document, and I think it should be clarified before we actually put this out. And I think Councillor Sanderson's number 3 would allow the General Manager to get rid of all references to the municipality, if that's in fact correct things.
Fine, thanks for picking that up. We'll certainly look at that. Councillor Miles.
You should have stayed Royal Borough.
And we could have that argument about Hunter, the apostrophe in Huntersville as well, which is sort of aimless hours of nonsense. Just on this document, as Councillor Sanderson said, it's a very important document and it will guide widespread LEP. I guess the health check that was designed as a part of this process is really the rubber meeting road, and that's something that I'm looking forward to this document guiding. I think the thing to point out and the important thing about this document is that it's split into the villages of Hunters Hill, and I think that is a very sound way of approaching both the local strategic planning statement and what we're doing in the future with the LEP review that will probably take place after this is adopted in the first half of next year, because I think this has to give effect to not change but perhaps looking at where we can improve those villages, particularly breathe a bit more life into them and get them a bit more active, and that's something I'm particularly passionate about, and something that I think has been required for some time, a sort of a healthy review of what's going on in our town centres and villages. I mean, if you look at the statistics in this document, we have more young people in Hunters Hill than we do have old people. Now, that's not really something that I see reflected in a large part in a lot of what we do. We've always had a focus towards the elderly, and we will continue to, but perhaps, again, something more on the youth side, which is something that's not been a focus of council, I feel, traditionally, is something we can look at as a part of that process. So I'm looking forward to that. It's a very important document, and I think that the council staff have done a very good job in putting this together.
Thank you. I think council staff had done a pretty good job putting it together too, and I even will deal with that later, I guess, and find a way to acknowledge that. Councillor Williams.
Yes, Mr Mayor. I agree that this is a critical document for our municipality, and I believe it's vital to getting our revision of LEP and DCP right. And as such, I spent a long time going through the document and gave council staff a 6-page, 57 dot point insight to what I felt needed to be considered in the next phase of the document. Having such an insight to what I think the document is about and should be about, there are some fundamental flaws in the document at the moment, which I don't see that have been corrected in the time between last time councillors were able to have a comment and now. A classic example is there's confusion between sustainability and livability, and for it to go out in its current form with livability issues boldly within sustainability issues, I think would be considered an error by many people in the community and should be fixed up before it goes out. So there's we were going to have definitions, which I think we discussed at the workshop, and that's one of the issues I think flows through the document. There's a lot of nice words used, but how that relates to exactly what we intended to be when it flows through to such things as LEP and DCP is not clear, and so I think definitions are quite critical in it. I noticed the Gladesville Hospital is quite prominent within that, and so it should be, because that's a site that has opportunity but needs to be dealt with sensitively. It seems to be confused with the Gladesville shopping precinct issue, and I think they need to be teased out as separate issues and dealt with separately. So anyway, I won't go through point by point, but there's a range of issues that I think still need to be considered, and maybe point 3 will allow that to happen in another iteration. So I look forward to that opportunity, because there are some issues that need to be tidied up.
Thank you, councillor. Anybody wishing to speak against? For? I put the motion? I'll put the motion. Do you need a right of reply?
I would, Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Councillor Sanderson.
Yes, look, as someone's involved in seniors committee, I should point out, we do have a lot of young. We have, relatively speaking, we have even more old. If you look at the numbers comparatively, we are a little above in terms of our youthful population. That's due in part to Borders at Joey's, but we are very much above in terms of our seniors population. It's therefore important that we cater inclusively for everyone in this community. And so I thought I'd just point out that. I'm also very aware in the third round of suggestions that I sent through this morning, I held back on the sort of changes that Councillor Williams is advocating. This is certainly going to be an iterative process, and there's a lot of work to be done in those iterations. So I look forward to this process. I think the important thing is, as a council, we remain engaged with it closely, and we have the opportunity to discuss and resolve issues, because it is an incredibly important document.
Thank you, Councillor. I think Councillor Miles was just making the point that we need to consider everybody. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, against, that's carried. Thank you very much. And thank you for your work on the document, Councillor Sanderson and Councillor Williams. And Councillor Miles, I know, came and did some work on it as well. 4.2, community grants. Councillor Collins.
I'd like to move the an amended version, if I may. Seconded. Thank you.
What is it you wish to?
Already seconded.
What is it you wish to?
Well, I've all basically this current. What I want to change it to is so that the limit of $800 per grant is not put in there, so that council's not constrained, in that process. Is that
so remove the maximum? Is that what you'd like to do?
That's right.
Page 13.
I'll second that.
So in the item 4.2, is it the policy or the?
So the report.
So I think you have to amend this back.
Council, amend the policy. So 1.1 in the policy, in the grant categories, up to $800 per application. Just to strike that line out.
Okay. So to come back to the document itself, there would be in the report, so we could make a change to it in that document. Is that, am I right?
It would be in the document, because it refers to the document and adoption of the policy rather than a recommendation.
Yes, General Manager.
Sorry, Councillor, may I just say something to that? It's often helpful to provide a guide to people making an application. The reason being is that if people aren't aware that there is a limit, they may sometimes submit applications for $5,000 or $10,000 or $13,000 that make it difficult in terms of sometimes assessing, or I know of councils that have had to go back to applicants and suggest to them, would you be happy reducing the scope and going to this? So if $800 isn't seen to be enough, and if the council was of a mind, it might be good to give applicants at least a guide as to what type of amount would be seen to be reasonable given the size of the total pool.
Okay, no, that's I'm happy with that. If I might just briefly speak to why. Look, I think that
Do we have a seconder?
Yeah.
Councillor Miles, thank you.
I think that the reason, so that the $800 is obviously working quite well, but we had a situation, I think, with when we have an event like, say, Bedlam at the Bay, where it's a fantastic community event. It's on a larger scale. They are not. It is not a common one. Under the current policy, we were unable to help them secure additional funds in order to put that event on. Now, I think that should be a decision of council whether we want to basically give the opportunity for some of the bigger projects, and maybe instead of giving $800 to 15 groups, the decision might be made to take half the number of groups and put on a bigger event where the opportunity for impact is high, because we should be judging these applications based on community impact. And unfortunately, I think we've lost hopefully not permanently, but for this particular year, an event that should have taken place, which was of great benefit to the community, couldn't take place because we were unable to secure funding from council. So whilst I think $800 is a good number for lots of little groups, there should be some scope for council to maybe consolidate some of those amounts and give it to one group that's doing a bigger project. So that's the reason for that. So I move that amendment.
Okay, could I just check? We as a council, this is something that happens at a regular time every year, when we sit down and work through these. If we as a council were of a mind to support a particular event, we can do that separate to this, can't we?
To you, Mr. Mayor. Normally with these grants, you'd have groups that would apply.
Yes.
The benefit of this is that there is a pot of money already allocated to support community groups with their projects. If groups approach council outside of this program, it means that council then needs to find the funds that may not have been allocated. So it means either reallocating, or we're generally reallocating in our case.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my understanding is not outside our scope to give money to something if we felt it was significant, even though we would have to, it wouldn't be a budgeted amount.
Yeah, well, if it's not in the budget, it's not going to happen, is it? So the point is to actually, the reason why we have these grants is so that we have a set amount in the budget to give to community groups. All I'm suggesting here is that we have some flexibility about how we allocate that pre-budgeted money. And I wonder whether it's whether there is any value of running this, if it has to be done one time of the year, or if it can just be continual as groups need it, whether it can be open, or some recommendations on that.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, the intent of running once a year was to provide, and at the same time every year, was to provide groups with that certainty so that they knew, okay, the funding round's coming up, they could submit an application and will know whether or not it was successful by a given date, and that then gives them some certainty in terms of planning events or projects. Whereas if it's a rolling program, it's difficult to assess the merit of applications because you're only assessing against what you have before you at that time. So the benefit of a grants program is the council has the ability to assess the merits of all applications and the pool of funds available at that time.
Okay. So if we were to amend this to allow for that $800 to be potentially increased, and you think that would be best off served once a year?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe an annual round would be the most...
I'm happy with that. That's
So
fine.
do you have in mind a particular amount?
For Bedlam at the Bay, whatever they need to do
No,
it,
for
but
this-
that's
for
obviously that's a decision of
For the
council.
purpose of this, do you have a particular...
I just don't think, I think we should put a cap on it when we decide what we do. I think we should look at community impact. If we've got a community group that's benefiting a higher number of people, then we should be able to increase the amount that we give.
Okay, so no amount in there?
No
I
amount,
think that's
no.
your motion.
That's,
All right.
yes, that's right.
Okay.
But I'm okay with a recommendation. So it's basically to give scope to go outside that, but I still envisage that we'd have $800 going to most people, potentially have a larger amount to sort of one-off.
All right, can I check? That's your motion? You have a seconder?
Yeah, that's
Your amended motion?
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Anybody wishing to speak against the motion? Thank you, Councillor Collins. Councillor Cresswell.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I will speak against it. I've sat on the community grant, whatever you call it, allocation committee 2 years now, and it's a really rewarding process. I recommend it. What you get to see is all size and scale and value of all of the community groups who look forward to the opportunity every year to seek council's support in any small way. What we found last year was, and all of those groups of course know that there's roughly an $800 limit. What we found last year was we had some money left over, and as you might remember, I made the motion that we actually gift that money to Bedlam at the Bay, along with waiving their oval fees. So there's opportunity to do that anyway, which we can do as a resolution of council. My personal experience with council, having brought Street Feast to the community about 6 years ago now, was that I came to council with significant sponsorship, and I asked council to support it, and council passed a motion to allocate some funding and a lot of support to get that really important community event and very successful event on the ground. So I think there are avenues to do it. I think the way that this policy statement is worded is it helps people know what they can expect when they do this process. And I would certainly be very sad to see any of the many community groups who benefited from our grants last time. I would be very sad to have to go back to any of them and say that we don't feel that what they are offering is value enough because they're only offering it to 100 playgroup students at the All Saints Church, for example, as opposed to a larger event. I think there's other avenues for larger scale funding that we could perhaps look to put into our budgets in the future. I don't think we should mess with this. It works very nicely.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wishing to speak for the motion? Councillor Miles.
Just to say, I mean, I've sat on the committee as well, and it is difficult to pick various projects over others. It was disappointing that Bedlam at the Bay couldn't be held this year. Essentially, all that this is doing is asking for council to be given the discretion about how it uses its funds. Now, I agree that it would be sad to see anything fall off that list, and it would be great if we had a larger pool of money. And I've always thought that our grants budget is fairly low end when it comes to how other local government areas treat their grants budget, but we don't have a very large budget to be dealing with. So if it grows over time, it will have to be a reflection of how this council's growing its own budget, and I accept that completely. I think that it's quite sensible to give a guide, as the General Manager said, so that expectations are set, so that there's not $10,000 and $15,000 being applied for every year. That guide, I think, can form part of that process without us setting an upper limit for each community group getting a set amount. I think that I have seen in the past, as a member of that committee, quite a few community groups applying for the maximum amount when given the guide. As they do, that's how they operate generally, and all luck to them. But I think it should be at the discretion of council how we spend this grant money, and if it does mean that we're stretching it over to $1,000 or $2,000 for a large community organisation or event like Bedlam at the Bay or Street Feast, and I was always supportive of Street Feast and trying to make sure that was well funded, and Harbour Sculpture, another amazing event that we've lost through that funding, and a whole bunch of things that that have fallen by the wayside a little. I think it should be at the discretion of council about how we spend that money and the committee. So that's my piece, but I certainly think in the future we could be looking to spend a little bit more of council resource on grants funding.
Thank you. Anybody wishing to speak against? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. as many councillors around the table, I've also sat on that process. I think we're dealing with two separate issues here. One is something which I would hope to become a long-term event, and those which are project-based. And the ones that come through this grant system we have at the moment is not just, I want money and you hand it out. It's done through a process of they have a project or they have a purpose for what they want that specific money for. And council can weigh up whether or not it thinks that meets the outcomes council's looking for. So that is a process which a lot of our community groups depend on to do something different, to do something new, to build on what they're doing. And I think that's important for council to maintain and keep that focus on making sure a broad base of our community get an opportunity to engage with some funding on specific projects. We run things like Mookaboola, we run things like Wine and Food Festival, we run, in the past councils run street feasts. There's a whole range of activities going on in our community which are an annual based activity that have broad reach in our community as well as outside the community. And I think they're more appropriately done on a long-term basis where council provides a commitment, and that is through the budgetary process. If we're talking about, say, the Bedlam Bay event being held next year, council has plenty of time leading up to its budget to make a decision on whether it wishes to contribute to that. So I think we need to give a very clear indication to community groups of what monies they can obtain. I think we have to keep it modest to ensure that a broad range of our community groups have access to funds that they might not otherwise to do some useful things. And for those big projects that occur and those ongoing projects that go on year after year, then I believe that should be a responsibility of council to allocate funds to support that, not to distort what is basically a short-term community support process through the community grants. So I can't support uncapping the process, and I'd like to see council in the near future talk to the Bedlam Bay project and see how that could be developed, not only through council sponsorship, but also through other sponsorships which work so well with worthwhile causes in our community.
Thank you. Anybody wishing to speak for the motion? Against the motion?
I won't speak against the motion, but I just wanted to raise something that we raised earlier, which was a slight amendment to the recommendation where it says for profit and incorporated, we were going to include involuntary organisations. So that covers unincorporated corporations as well.
Through you, Mr Mayor, maybe under section 2, under eligibility and within the policy document itself, second dot point, if
page 14.
Sorry, page 14. Perhaps we could add where it has been incorporated and or volunteer organisation.
And or volunteers, yeah. Or volunteers.
That would require
We come back to you.
Yeah,
Come back to you. All right, does that answers your question?
Yes, thank you.
Anybody wishing to speak for the motion? Councillor Collins, maybe you could pick that up in your...
yes, I will. I'll have right of reply. This is simply a matter of incorporating some flexibility in the budgetary process, which I feel that maybe some councillors don't fully understand here. This is not to say that we are going to allocate more money to a particular project. This is simply saying that we can do that if the council decides. Now, when I've tried to bring measures to this council to save money in the budget so that we can do other things with it, they get knocked back. When I look at an opportunity where we can be more flexible with the budget that we have allocated, it gets knocked back. The reality is that this particular event, Bedlam at the Bay, could have gone on with the funding that it took for this council's pay rise this year. We didn't do that. It would have been enough to actually have this event. So I'm glad that everybody's enjoying their little pay rise this year, but Bedlam at the Bay is not happening. So, you know, have a bit of perspective here. It is not about putting a particular project first. It is simply saying that council has the ability within its budget to be flexible in the way it allocates funds. It is a simple matter of process. It is not making a decision. So I cannot understand how this could be knocked back, but it just means that we are tying our own hands so that we can't do anything bigger this year, which is a shame. Now, I will speak to the unincorporated issue. It is completely inappropriate for us to give ratepayer funds to an unincorporated association with no governance structures in place. If we are giving money to a particular organisation, they need to have sound and robust governance structures which would take place if they were an incorporated association or a company limited by guarantee. An unincorporated association has absolutely no accountability to its members. It is effectively the same as giving it to an individual. So that is completely inappropriate. We would just basically, so I do not support that going in. I take it this is going to fail, but I will not accept that that amendment, which seems going to be lost anyway.
Right, thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? It's lost. Councillor Sanderson.
I move the original motion with the amendments suggested by the General Manager that at the second point under number 2, that be incorporated have added to it and or volunteers.
Voluntary organisations.
Or voluntary organisations, if you would prefer.
And a seconder, Councillor Williams. Sure. Councillor Sanderson.
Look, I think this is pretty self-explanatory from all the other people that have spoken, you know, to start hiving off large amounts of this money to a larger organisation is, you know, robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I mean, I wouldn't want to be saying to the men's shed or whatever other organisation it is, well, we can't have your $800. We've seen something bigger and better. I mean, I think that the whole process with this, or the whole aim and justification is this, that we are helping small organisations, young sports people and a whole range of other activities. It's about community in a different sense to things like, well, when you look at the way that this recommendation is written, or the policy is written, what it's about is giving things, and it's very strict, to members of our community. Bedlam at the Bay, great things, but on the other hand, they are more about broader issues. I mean, you know, it's just that it happens to be based in Hunters Hill. We should support it, but I think we still need to have a priority to look after these small organisations. And $800 is a nice assistance to those sort of people. I also reject Councillor Collins' idea that you can't give it to voluntary organisations. I can't find it in the presentation, but I do notice that in the drafting of this policy there are protections against that. So I have no issue at all with the recommendation as drafted, with the minor adjustment to include voluntary organisations.
Thank you. Wishing to speak against. Councillor Collins.
Well, I will probably sound a little repetitive here, but I suppose that's nothing new. What we are suggesting here is going from a situation where we hand over council grants to organisations that have robust governance structures in place. As I might add that any state or federal government grant has to be from either an incorporated association or a company limited by guarantee, otherwise it has to come to a council. You are suggesting that we should hand over this money to an organisation with no accountability, no governance structures, no accountability to its members, us not knowing who their members are, that not being a public record, absolutely no leadership obligations on the group. There is no requirements for an AGM, elected committee members. There's often no constitution. Effectively, you are basically saying that a group of people can get together and say, we are an unincorporated association, let's just see if we can get some council money. And that's it. That is all it would take, is for 3 friends to sit around a table and write a letter and call themselves the, I don't know, friends. No, they're an incorporated association. But they are now. And that's why they're getting grants, you see? That's why they're getting grants. Once you get to that stage where you are applying for grants, then you would absolutely incorporate, because that is what the government requires. We would be the only level of government, I suspect probably the only council, that is basically giving out money to anybody. This is irresponsible. It is absolutely irresponsible and unacceptable.
Thank you, councillor. Anybody wishing to speak for? Councillor Williams.
Questions? The pretty strong comments by Councillor Collins. I was wondering, through you, Mr Mayor, to the General Manager, is Council doing the right thing here in relation to voluntary groups?
Excuse me, point of order. I think,
What's the point of order?
I think Councillor Williams is trying to bring the General Manager into the debate, when I think this is something that we need to settle ourselves.
Thank you, councillor Collins. It's a correctly constituted. It's a correctly constituted question, and you're seeking an opinion.
Yes.
3, Mr Mayor. It is an application process, so anyone who is applying would need to fill out a comprehensive application form. There are also, as part of the conditions of funding in section 9, it does talk about the acquittal of the funds and how those funds are to be used. One of the challenges for community groups, and often volunteer-based groups, particularly when they're starting up, is that ability to actually start up. And there is the opportunity through this type of grant program to offer seed funding to help groups become established. But I think between the application form and then in section 9, the conditions of funding and the acquittal of those funds, there are enough safeguards, and looking also, or being mindful of the actual amount being applied for as well. It may well only be $100 to seek incorporation, so it will be based and assessed on its merits, but there are safeguards to ensure that funds are used for the purpose for which council ultimately would give permission for them to be used.
Councillor, does that answer your question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes.
Did you wish to speak further?
No, Mr Mayor.
Anybody wishing to speak for Councillor Cresswell?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. And also thanks to the General Manager for that answer. It's a little about, I was actually going to read a little section of section 9 out, because it says here, where a service or partnership arrangement is entered into, it should be jointly developed and approved by the council and the applicant prior to the funding being made available. So I think that when you've got a panel of, I think last year it was 3 or 4, the year before it was 3 or 4 people, and the applicant has gone through the process of working with the council or the council staff to put their application together, I think by that point you'd be fairly clear on whether the small amount of money that they're applying for was tasked around a living room table to buy cask wine, or actually a valid request for support for the little things our community groups do. And I think they're really important. I know I've been in a lot of community groups that have benefited from this. The Mamas Choir, for example, for several years have really found it helpful to be able to stage our performances and raise money for some really important causes in and around our community. And I just think it's a really nice thing for us to be able to do, to give them as much help as we possibly can. So,
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wishing to speak against? For? Right, a reply?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'll be brief. Just in the time I've been speaking, I've flicked through this, and I think there are very adequate protections, so I don't think Councillor Collins has any genuine concern about the body not being doing or needing to be incorporated. I've noticed here that in the exclusions that the money can't be granted to a body or groups without legal entity. So once you've got legal entity, you've got some cause of action. At the end of the day, what we're risking $800. We've got an accounting process so that very rightly people have got to account with what they did with the money. You certainly won't be making a second mistake with the same applicant. So I think this is well drafted and thoroughly deserving of support.
Okay. Well,
Before you do that, Mr Mayor,
hold on.
we'll just address
Hold on.
on a point of order.
I have a point of order for you.
For me?
Yes, we've moved to right of reply.
Yes.
And after right of reply, the motion needs to be put.
However, the point of order goes into what an assertion that was made about me, a personal assertion which I'm entitled to defend.
Mr Mayor.
We have to put the motion.
Mr Mayor, there's been a call for the motion to be put.
We're required to put the motion, and we've got two people asking the motion.
Well, then I'll put my point of order after the discussion then, the vote.
I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried.
Point of order.
Councillor Collins.
Councillor Sanderson asserted that I don't have a genuine concern for the government, for the incorporation of these entities. That's a personal assertion about me, and that is incorrect for you to say that. I'm simply saying that we should have robust governance structure when we hand out council funds.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Sanderson. Could I ask you to withdraw that assertion, please?
I don't think there's anything to withdraw, Mr Mayor.
Well, you did say it.
You made an assertion. Could I ask that you withdraw that assertion, please?
Look, I'll withdraw it if you like, Mr Mayor, but I think it's...
Withdrawn. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
It's so
Thank you.
minor that it's probably
Thank you.
necessary.
Thank you, Councillor. And could I ask you all not to make assertions, criticise other councillors or criticise the staff, please? Under the terms of our meeting practice, we're unable to do those things. We'll move on to 4.3, am I correct there?
Motion, Mr Mayor.
Community Representative Bushland Management. Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Craswood. So receive and note. Any further discussion? Councillor Williams.
Just a quick comment, Mr Mayor. This has been a little while in coming to be, and I think we've got it right. There is a very good cross-section of representation here representing our important bushland. And what this now does do is give us a very clear focus on how we want to move forward with bushland management and harnessing the benefits which our numerous volunteers that work in our bushland on a weekly basis will do. It not only gives them an opportunity to engage on issues of common interest, but also gives them some opportunity to provide best practice, learn about best practice, learn about what sort of measures will give them that outcome that they're looking for, performance measures as well. So I think this is very worthwhile, something that we've worked on for 9 months now, and I think we've got it right, and I'm looking forward to a good future for protecting and enhancing our natural bushland through, principally through volunteerism.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wish to speak against? 4. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. 4.4, reminder amendment to the meeting code of practice. Councillor Collins, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Collins.
Question. So, can I just clarify through you, Mr Mayor, to the General Manager? Is this motion simply to increase, at the moment, we are only allowed to have 2 speakers, is that right?
Speakers.
4 speakers, two
Two
of each.
speakers, two
speakers.
for and 2 against.
And that's since the new code of meeting practices come in?
3, Mr Mayor, in the adopted code of meeting practice. Yes, that's what's stated.
So, does that mean we've been in breach of the code since it's been instructed, or?
Yes, I think that's fair.
Okay. Does that have any ramifications, or what do we have to do?
Through Mr Mayor, I don't believe so, because the decision to enable speakers to address the council has not disadvantaged. You could say the converse. If the decision had been made to limit the number of speakers, there may be an argument in that way. So I don't believe by not adhering to 2 for and 2 against, anyone has been disadvantaged by not being heard.
Okay. Okay.
Councillors, any further questions? You have movements, okay?
Yep.
So, any further discussion required, councillors? The change is to give the mayor or deputy mayor or the chairperson an opportunity to, on important matters, to allow extra speakers, and I think it's a sensible thing to do. There will be cases where we do want to have as many speakers as possible. We had an instance recently. We gave every speaker who wanted to speak an opportunity. In fact, we gave many speakers additional time to speak so that everyone felt heard at the end of the evening. So,
Question, or is it too late?
you can have a question? Sure.
Look, I think whoever wants to speak should be able to speak. Should this be is it normally a discretion thing, or is there some sort of way that if has anyone been refused before, or?
I have refused some speakers that had topics which weren't on the agenda for the night.
Right.
We've allowed some speakers to speak on certain nights. It's happened. It's rare, but it has happened.
Okay. Is it possible for us to, if that happens, that councillors become made aware of that within the policy, or is that something?
So we've got a code of meeting practice which lays down the number of speakers.
Yeah.
And it's based on the draft code of practice, isn't it?
The model code.
The model code. It's on the model code. So we've adopted that, and we're asking for a small amendment to allow the mayor, chairperson, or whoever's deputy mayor to allow extra speakers. And it comes up during the day. It comes up just after noon on the day of a meeting where a call comes in, list the number of speakers who's speaking. And I usually ask, does it relate to a particular item? Who is it speaking? What is it they want to speak about? Does it relate to an item? And tonight we've got somebody who spoke when the item wasn't listed for tonight's meeting, but we can allow that too, if necessary. All right, can I put the motion? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you, councillors. 4.5, Administration of Elections. Councillor Collins, seconded Councillor Williams. Councillor Collins?
No, look, I think that's...
All right. Anybody wishing to speak against? For, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. .6. Now, there's a suggestion here that, which you might see on your table, that a number of things could be moved in a block from 4.6. Can you see if you can locate that sheet of paper?
Yeah.
4.6, 4.9, 4.10, 4.11, 4.12, 4.13 and 4.15. Councillors, could you just have a quick look through those and see if there's any of those you particularly would like to debate? And if not, we perhaps move them as a block. Councillor Williams?
There's 4.10, Mr. Mayor.
4.10.
It's just a comment I want to make.
Okay, anybody else? Councillor McLaughlin?
I've just got a comment or a slight amendment for item 4.12.
4.12. Councillors, any other councillors? Councillor Prasso?
And I just actually had a question around 4.12 and 13.
All right. So I think we're all clear to move 4.6, 4.9, 4.11 and 4.15 as a block. Is everybody in agreement? Moved Councillor Collins, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So we go to 4.10. Development applications determined under delegated authority.
Sorry.
4.10.
We missed 4.7.
4.7.
We have
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
7 and 8.
7 and 8.
4.7 and 8. Surrender of leases. Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Miles. Any discussion required, councillors? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's unanimous. 4.8 financial assistance grant.
Third motion.
Sorry? What have I done?
no, nothing. All good. Sorry, Mr.
What
Mayor.
have I done? Financial assistance grant 4.8. Councillor Miles, Councillor Williams. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's unanimous.
Okay, 4.9 we've done, so we're at
4.10.
Move the recommendation, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Seconded Councillor Grassoy. Any discussion, Councillor Williams?
Not discussion, Mr Mayor, but just to thank the staff for the more inclusive presentation of decisions around tree removal. I think that really has improved my understanding of what's intended by council staff, so thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Thank you for the suggestion. Any further discussion required, councillors? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimous. 4.12. Minutes of Gladesville Main Street Committee. Councillor Crassoy, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Crassoy.
There's just a question actually, Mr Mayor, through you to the General Manager. One of the members of the Gladesville Main Street Committee raised the suggestion, and a very good suggestion. The minutes 4.12 and 4.13 are both from the meeting which was held in May, because those minutes were approved by the committees at the recent meetings. And so there was a suggestion about how we manage minute acceptance in future, and I wondered if that had to be formalised in any way at council or whether it can just be done at the next meetings.
So I think we can just implement that, councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Sanderson.
Mr Mayor, I wonder whether I could make a suggestion in that area. If people have a look at the terms of reference for the new Bushland Management Advisory Group, which I drafted myself, there are provisions in that those terms of reference for that if it's decided that should be made formal.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin.
Just in relation to the Gladesville Main Street Committee minutes, sorry, it's only a small thing, but the declarations of interest, the Mayor called for declarations. I don't think the Mayor was present.
It's a template thing.
Thanks for that. We'll make that adjustment too. Who was the chairperson? Councillor Crassoy. Councillor Crassoy? Yeah. Thanks, Councillor. Any further discussion? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. What's the next one? 4.15, councillors?
No, 4.13.
Oh, 4.13. Thank you.
Elizabeth, councillor Crassoy.
Councillor Crassoy, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Crassoy?
That was my question answered. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Uh, 4.14. Move Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Crassoy, excuse me. Councillor Williams, did you wish to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, it was a privilege to represent council at the National General Assembly of local government across the nation. It was their 25th year of conducting that forum, and it had a very extensive representation of local government. It was curious to see that the smallest council present there was the Diamantina, or whatever it is. Yeah, Shire, and they have a residency of 159 residents, and they have a rate base of 6 ratepayers. But they manage a very large area and they have a very large budget. So you don't have to be large to be effective in serving the community. So I found that very instructive. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum, Brisbane City Council, with millions of people in a very convoluted and very hierarchical process, not too dissimilar to a state government. So the local government across Australia is very diverse, has a range of operations, but it's all about serving and filling that niche that serves your local community. And local is what local government's about. There was a range of excellent speakers, and the focus of the, or the theme of the conference was future focus. And it was about looking at how councils can move forward in a very dynamic and changing world, one that has a lot of challenges for not only councils but most institutions and organisations through disruptive technology and a shift to crowd-powered communities, which I found a very fascinating talk by Steve Sammartino, who went to great lengths to highlight the impact and the opportunity which communities now have through social media and through their networks, and it's quite powerful as to where the future. We think it's taken us so far now with Facebook and all the other social media platforms, but there's a real opportunity, well, not a real opportunity, there will be a great dynamic that will come out in the future that will even shift that power back to the community even further. Another focus of the event was housing infrastructure and population, and we all know things are getting very difficult in terms of providing affordable housing and even just housing the large numbers of people that are coming into this country. So that was a very useful topic. One very relevant area was about sharing our languages, and there was a whole session on Aboriginal and Torres Strait community languages, the Indigenous languages, and it's quite amazing as to the extent and depth of not only what used to be, but what they're recreating and supporting into the future. And councils have a role in helping with that as well. Waste management was again another important topic, but the main feature that came out of that is Australasian recycling labelling, which I think will at least get a level playing field across the nation and be able to communicate to our communities the best and most appropriate way to deal with particular types of packaging and waste which they have to make a decision on which bin to put it into or where to take it to a resource management facility. There was a range of other interesting things that came out of the conference. Some things like what are we doing about recharging stations for the emerging electric car industry, about drones. We still haven't addressed that. I brought that to council last year, having a policy on drones. Council is exposed. If it doesn't have a policy on drones, there's a whole structure and process to do that. Solar lighting we're right into, but again, that was a major feature and an opportunity for councils to provide lighting in places that would otherwise be too expensive to do so. Then there was the inevitable sessions on motions, which there was 120 odd motions put through, and as councillors around the table will know, there's always a different viewpoint around issues, and there was quite a lot of interesting and constructive debate that took place. What I've done for council is extracted out of that large list a series of motions which I think have common interest for us or have some impact on the way we should be looking at issues or like to look at issues into the future. I won't go through those in detail, but the usual ones of constitutional recognition, which is one that this council played a role in the last conference. It was interesting to see that every politician, including the Deputy Prime Minister and some of the Liberal ministers, got up all endorsing constitutional recognition is important and should happen for councils. So we're making a step closer to that. Again, finances were always a big focus in the motions early on in the debate, and we've heard tonight about our financial assistance grants has been increased by 4%, but in reality, local government's been cheated by that because it should be, what's it, 0.1% of GDP, but we only get 0.05%. So we're only getting half of what the original intent was of those grants and what was agreed to when it was set up in, I think, in the 90s. So it's gradually been whittled away. So one of the big emphases of the National Association is to try and convince the federal government that they need to get back to where they should be with financial assistance grants. And that would be of great assistance to this council as well, because basically we're operating on half the money that we should be getting from that area. Some of the trade things were of great interest. The Telstra position was one that we've talked about in this council, and the staff at Telstra are acutely aware of the concerns of local government and have preempted that through going to the courts to try and get clarity for their business, and I guess that reduces opportunity for councils to ensure that their interests are protected. There was an interesting debt collection stall there, which I don't know if the council has an issue with that, but certainly talking to the chairperson of that organisation has quite an attractive opportunity for councils to recover debt at no cost to themselves. Cup recycling was an interesting one on coffee. There's a whole system there for encouraging local cafes and restaurants to be in a network of coffee cup recycling. And one of one of the features of the conference was its relationship with Soldier On. It was promoting and sponsoring Soldier On, and donations were provided through the conference dinner and a whole range of other activities that took place over the 3 days. And I urge people to have a look at their website. It's just a very powerful and committed group of people servicing a very important part, but quite often forgotten part of our service to our nation. So, in a nutshell, Mr. Mayor, there was a lot of opportunities, these conferences are important because not only are they a chance for councillors to network, there's also a chance for local government to grow and develop through its interaction and sharing of knowledge and putting new ideas on the table. So I found it very rewarding, and I thank council for the opportunity to attend.
Thank you, councillor. Anybody wishing to speak against? Do you have a question? Councillor Collins first?
No question, but that's okay, Councillor.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Oh, I just wanted to thank Councillor Williams for this comprehensive report. I found it very, very interesting. It's always refreshing to see what other councils are doing, big and small. But again, Councillor Williams did raise a very good point about the drones policy. That's becoming more and more of an issue for our municipality. There's a lot of drones flying overhead, whether they're leisure or I'm not really sure. So I think we just need to have a look at that. I'm not sure what you need councillors to do.
Nothing at this stage.
Okay.
Nothing at this stage.
But it is a very important issue for this.
Councillor Collins.
I was just going to ask, through you, Mr. Mayor, General Manager, there's no financial impact assessment on this report. Is that, should it be on every report, or this obviously came at a cost? Just wondering why that hasn't been displayed.
The cost report at the time we moved the motion.
Well, the cost of this whole no, but I mean sending to this conference.
So what is your question?
How
Should
much it
this
cost
contain?
to send a councillor Canberra to?
Was that covered when we originally moved the motion to send the
The
councillor?
actual cost wasn't actually included.
Through Mr. Mayor, I'd need to check, but usual practice is when councillors are nominated to go to a conference, the cost is in the financial section of the report when that report comes to council. I don't believe that it's been included in delegates' reports back to council post-conference.
Okay. What would it take to, through you, Mr. Mayor, to incorporate that into councillors' delegate reports? Would that just be something that we could do as a financial impact assessment? I think it's for transparency for the community to know how much these things cost.
It could be done, if that's the answer to the question. So, anybody wishing to speak against the report? Councillor Williams, thanks very much for your very thorough report. I read through all the motions. I found it interesting, the commonality amongst many of the councils that had the same problems, particularly with financing their activities. And I must say to you, it's a very thorough report, and it certainly is very close to rivaling the reports we used to receive from Councillor Astridge. Thank you very much. Any further discussions, councillors? Any further business? Any questions without notice? Late item.
No, we dealt with it.
We've done the lot?
Yeah, we've done it.
All right. Meeting closed, 9 p.m. Thank you very much.